Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme tonight, a huge flare-up in Israel's war against Hamas. Gaza's largest refugee camp was hit by a series of powerful explosions, killing many people. The Israeli military claimed that the airstrikes that caused the blasts killed a Hamas commander linked to the October 7th attacks. 9 Israeli soldiers were also killed in Gaza in fighting on the ground, with internet and communications completely cut off. All this at a time when WikiLeaks has published a document which describes an Israeli plan to depopulate all of Gaza, pushing residents to the North Sinai in Egypt. The very latest as far as Israel is concerned, at a time when there's been a major operation, but one that has cost a lot of lives, possibly in Gaza.
Survivors in agony as they try to collect mangled remains of an Israeli airstrike victim. The Israeli Defense Forces on Tuesday struck Jabalia, the largest refugee camp in Gaza, flattening housing blocks and killing dozens, according to the Hamas-run health ministry.
Gaza has become a graveyard for children. It's a living hell for everyone else.
The IDF says they hit a Hamas command and tunnel network in a combined operation of ground troops and an airstrike, and killed Ibrahim Biari, one of the key planners of the October 7 attack on Israel. Israel says many other terrorists were also killed. IDF accused Hamas of using civilians in Jabalia as human shield, saying Hamas is destroying Gaza.
סינואר וכל בכירי חמאס מנסים לייצר תמונה של עזה הרוסה ועזתים הרוגים באשמת ישראל ואשמת צה"ל. הם לא יצליחו להסתיר את האשמים האמיתיים, הם עצמם שהמיתו אסון על עזה.
Hamas has said that the air raids killed 7 civilian hostages, including 3 foreign passport holders. The brutal attack on the refugee camp drew condemnation from across the globe, especially Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt and Jordan. Bolivia has severed diplomatic ties with Israel over the attacks in Gaza. Jabalia is a densely populated area that lies in the North Gaza. Israel had asked Gazans living in the north to move to the southern part of the enclave as it intensified air raids in the region. Jabalia has been hit by air raids ever since the war began. In the midst of such apocalyptic scenes, there was some hope, as reports said, that the Rafah crossing on the Egypt-Gaza border opened for foreign nationals and injured people. With Vishal Vivek, Usama Shah for NDTV.
A leaked concept paper outlining a proposal to transfer 2.3 million people of Gaza to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula has drawn condemnation in Gaza. It may also worsen tensions with Cairo, which is against taking any more Palestinian refugees.
$2.3 million people of Gaza should be transferred to the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. This is a proposal by Israel's Ministry of Intelligence. The document is dated October 13th, 6 days after Hamas militants killed more than 1,400 people in southern Israel and took over 250 hostages. PM Netanyahu's office has downplayed it, saying it's just a concept paper, a hypothetical exercise. However, it has drawn condemnation from Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and a sharp reaction from Egypt. A spokesman for the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said, "We are against transfer to any place in any form, and we consider it a red line that we will not allow to be crossed. What happened in 1948 will not be allowed to happen again. A mass displacement would be tantamount to declaring a new war."
كل ذرة رمل هنا احنا مستعدين كمصريين نبذل فيها ملايين الارواح، بس ما حدش يقرب منها مهما كان ان يتم فرض عليها اي شيء، ولن نسمح بحل او تصفية قضايا اقليمية على حسابنا.
The document proposes moving Gaza's civilian population to 10 cities in northern Sinai, then building permanent cities and an undefined humanitarian corridor. A security zone would be established inside Israel to block the displaced Palestinians from entering. The Intelligence Ministry is a junior ministry that conducts research but does not set policy. but its report has brought back memories of 1948 when Israel was created. Egypt ruled Gaza between 1948 and 1967 when Israel captured the territory along with the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The vast majority of Gaza's population are the descendants of Palestinian refugees uprooted from what is now Israel. During the 1948 Palestine War, in which the State of Israel was established, more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs, or 85% of the total population of the territory Israel captured, fled or were expelled from their homes by Israeli forces. The concept of transfer has been generally equated with expulsion of Arabs from Israel in 1948. The causes for this mass displacement is a matter of great controversy among historians, journalists and commentators. Head of the Israeli National Security Council said they were in talks with Egypt. But whether the refugees will be allowed to return to Gaza is not clear, and that may force Egypt to harden its stance. In Delhi, Kadambini Sharma for NDTV.
Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader has issued a warning to Israel. Ayatollah Khamenei has called for an immediate end to the war and has urged Muslim nations to halt oil supply. That is a huge development in the situation, which is already so precarious.
راه صدور نفت و ارزاق به رژیم صهیونیستی رو ببندند. همکاری اقتصادی نکنند دولت‌های اسلامی با رژیم صهیونیستی.
All right, so lots of developments as far as West Asia is concerned. Joining us now, Colonel Peter Lerner. He's a spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces. Dr. Omar Abdelmanen, co-founder of the Gaza Medic Voices. Dr. Jonah Blank, ex-advisor to Joe Biden, the US President, and Ambassador Virendra Gupta, former Indian mission in New York, and the former acting Indian ambassador to Israel and Palestine. Thank you all very much for being with us. Colonel Lerner, let me come to you first. Could you shed some light on this document which has been leaked by WikiLeaks, which speaks about Palestinian civilians being asked to vacate North Gaza ahead of land operations entirely? In other words, they'll be moved to the Sinai in Egypt. Could you shed some light on that? Is this factually correct?
Vishnu, obviously, I will not comment on any leaked documents. I have no idea what the source of them are, and this is not part of the IDF's mission in this war against Hamas.
Would it be fair to say that this is, again, it's incorrect, it's inaccurate, and that you don't have any such plan at all?
Vishnu, it would be fair to say I will not comment on this paper. I have no idea what it is, where it's from, or who it represents.
Could you tell us, Colonel Lerner, a little bit about your operation in Gaza in the last 24 hours plus? We've seen the Jabalia camp being bombed. We are told there have been casualties over there, but also an important Hamas operative has been taken out. Could you share some details on that operation?
Sure. We are now in day 26 of our war against Hamas, after they declared war on Israel and killed over 1,400 Israelis and abducted 240 into the Gaza Strip. We have, in the last few days, been extending and increasing our activities on the air, at sea, and on the ground. And indeed, we conducted a strike, killing Ibrahim Biari and his henchmen in the tunnels of beneath Jabalia. This is a war against the people who perpetrated the crimes of the 7th of October. But Biari himself has had 20 years of blood, of Israeli blood on his hands. And we are, there's no doubt about it. This guy, given the chance, he would have done it again. So absolutely a military target. And we intended to take him out, to strike the infrastructure that served his activities. And indeed, from the images that we can see that due to the tunnels that Hamas themselves had invested so extensively beneath the ground, it appears that the structures, the buildings around them, collapsed into the tunnels that Hamas had set to try and safeguard themselves.
Colonel Lerner, I believe 9 Israeli personnel, soldiers, have been killed in your ground operations. Is that right? Could you share with us any details of that particular operation? Were they ambushed? Were they attacked? What exactly happened?
We announced this morning that 9 Israeli servicemen had been killed in exchanges with Palestinian terrorists. They launched an anti-tank rocket against the forces.
This is additional to 2 others that we announced yesterday that had been killed. So that was a total of 11. We are facing the enemy. We are meeting them on the battleground. We are engaging and killing them as we expected to do. We are very serious about dismantling and destroying Hamas. We are very serious about making sure that Hamas can never ever use the Gaza Strip again as a staging ground for massacres, murders, butchery, rape, and burning the people of Israel, and abduction. Of course, there is the concern of the hostages that is ongoing, and we are operating also to bring that to an end, to bring the hostages home safe and sound. It is, of course, the responsibility, their well-being is the responsibility of Hamas, but we demand that the International Committee of the Red Cross have access to the hostages in order to assess their situation. But they need to be brought home now.
Colonel Lerner, we are learning that foreign nationals who've been held hostage, possibly with dual citizenship with Israel, might actually be released. I mean, this is what's appearing on social media. Are you hearing that as well? Is there some indicator of those hostages, at least a few of them, being released in the next, I guess, couple of days?
So, this is Hamas continuing its psychological propaganda, and I can see that you're actually broadcasting the images of 3 hostages that they tried to manipulate Israel earlier this week. We have a very clear message. We don't believe a word they say. We will not fall for their manipulation, their psychological terrorism. It's something we won't accept. I would also suggest that everybody else listening to an organization, a terrorist army that has no problem butchering babies in their bedroom, not listen to anything that they say. They will have no problem whatsoever lying to you.
Colonel Lerner, just in terms of the larger operations, and I take your point about the hostages over there and the fact that they may have been forced to speak under duress. I take that point entirely. We've seen that in terrorism in India as well. But just on the larger issue of the war in Gaza, we do know that Israel has asked the north of Gaza to be vacated. That has happened to some extent. But if you are hunting for Hamas, it's not just going to be restricted to the north of Gaza. It would be other parts as well. The question is basic. Where do people who've moved south and where do people who live there already, where do they go?
So as you rightly pointed out, and you broadcasted the General Hagari's announcement from earlier today, we're calling and still call on the people of the north to move south. The south is safer. The south is safer than the north. We are focusing our operations against the stronghold, the fortress of terrorism that Hamas has established in Gaza City and in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Indeed, if and when we see fit to continue to seek out Hamas, and as they continue to conduct rocket strikes, rocket attacks against Israel, even from the south, then of course we will go in and conduct preemptive strikes, but also responsive strikes to those attacks. But it is safer in the south. There's a humanitarian zone that has been designated in the southwest. And there, as you saw today, there has been more trucks of humanitarian supplies, medical supplies that are coming in from Egypt. And that is why we're encouraging people to go south. Unfortunately, Hamas are doing everything in their ability to discourage people from going south. They're telling people to stay in the northern Gaza Strip, to jeopardize the people, to put them at risk, to basically to sacrifice them. When we are trying to move them out of harm's way, Hamas is trying to keep them in harm's way.
Colonel, one final question. Houthi rebels have been launching ballistic missiles at you. It's a fairly unprecedented development. They've launched cruise missiles against you, which were intercepted by US warships. Your own defenses have intercepted a missile bound from Yemen. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's a bizarre addition to this war.
So, anywhere Iran is involved is not bizarre. The reality on the ground is one where we need to be very strong in our defensive capabilities, both on the south from the Red Sea, and indeed, for the first time, our operational system, the Arrow aerial defense system, intercepted a cruise missile headed towards Israel. And indeed, we were successful in intercepting it outside of Israel's airspace. There was no threat to Israelis by this rocket, but there's also concerns of the north, of course, from Hezbollah in the north, and we continue to see. And you broadcasted the words of of Iran as we were coming on.
Yes.
And indeed, they are mixing, they are definitely pulling the strings. And they are also putting, I would say, the people of Lebanon and the country of Lebanon at risk. You know, Lebanon needs to think very, very carefully if they want to let Hezbollah draw them into a war that looks like what's going on in Gaza. We are very determined to defend ourselves. We had a anti-tank rocket missile fired at us earlier today. We responded, destroyed the position and the terrorists that launched that attack against us. We are very, very determined to defend our borders. And we are looking, the focus is on south, but we are very well prepared in the north along the border with Lebanon as well.
All right, Colonel, thanks as always for speaking to us and being forthright with your answers. Thanks very much indeed. Joining us now, Dr. Jonah Blank. Dr. Blank, just a quick question. The Iranian leadership's statement in just the last little while saying that oil supplies to Israel need to be cut off and appeal to the Muslim world would be perhaps one of the most strident statements made since this all began. What sort of threat does that represent? Because we've been worried about an expansion of this conflict.
Well, Vishnu, I think that the threat of expansion is very real. Iran has a great interest and a long history in stirring up a much wider conflict here. Would an oil embargo actually be effective? I suspect probably not, because of rivalry between Iran and Gulf Arab states, which have plenty of oil. But the bigger issue here is what happens after. What happens after the attacks we're seeing, because this pattern is going to continue for the coming weeks and months. And as far as I can see, there really is no end game.
That really is the worry. There doesn't appear to be an end game. Are you, however, encouraged with the Rafah border opening up, humanitarian aid getting in, and as I understand it, people with dual citizenship exiting Gaza?
Yes, that's a small mercy, but every mercy is worth having. The really big question, though, is what about the other 2 million people in Gaza, almost all of whom are civilians, and many thousands of whom have already been killed and injured and will be killed and injured on a continuing basis. That doesn't mean that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself. It certainly does. The point is that in every war, every nation has the legal obligation under international law to make every possible safeguard available for civilians who may be caught in the conflict.
Dr. Omar Abdelmanan, co-founder of the Gaza Medic Voices, is a pediatric neurologist in London. Dr. Abdelmanan, what are you hearing in terms of the ground situation in, let's say, the last 48 hours? We do know that some more humanitarian aid has been getting in. A lot of that is medical supplies. Has there been any improvement as far as that is concerned? Medical supplies into Gaza.
Thank you, Vishnu, for having me on the program. So in answer to that, we have been in contact with doctors and surgeons on a daily basis since this war started. The situation is deteriorated to apocalyptic levels, as your program rightly mentioned. The humanitarian aid that is trickling into Gaza from Egypt is really a drop in the ocean. We are seeing, as Dr. Jonah just pointed out, 2 million people, the majority of which don't have dual citizenship, the majority of which, half of which have migrated from north to south under the IDF's pretense of protection, and yet they continue to get bombed in the south. The hospitals are being targeted. So medical supplies are running out. The last communication I had with doctors on the ground was yesterday evening, before the comms got cut off again. And we know this is Israeli interference with their Wi-Fi and their 4G networks. And as a result of that, they have said to me that the Al-Shifa hospital, which is the largest hospital trauma center in the north of Gaza, which is housing 70,000 people sheltering inside and around the hospital, has run out of electricity. That was the last message that I had. It's run out of electricity. What that means is patients who are on ventilators, premature babies and neonatal units are dying. That means people who rely on hemodialysis or dialysis for kidney disease and other chronic conditions are also dying. That means that there is a massive capacity issue. And we have also seen that the supplies have run out. There is no fuel going in to replenish those generators to run them. I find it incredibly, brash of your IDF spokesman in mentioning psychological terrorism, because in fact, what Israel has been doing in this situation is fully psychological terrorism on the people of Gaza. Over 50% of the deaths have been children. One child is dying every 15 minutes as a result of direct Israeli bombardment of residential civilian areas. They talk about targeted bombing of civilian areas. It is fanciful. When you target residential civilian areas with carpet bombing, with white phosphorus munitions, which we've seen the injuries, and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have said, this is deplorable. This is frankly disgusting. And the world, unfortunately, and the West and President Biden and Mr. Sunak in the UK and many of the other world leaders are not taking enough action to call for an urgent ceasefire, which is the only thing that will make a difference right now.
Yeah.
Because as humanitarian aid enters, if we are in a situation of complete bombardment, then it is unsafe for doctors to go in, for surgeons to go in to help, for patients or critical patients to be transferred out. That is the reality.
I take your point, and completely. Ambassador Virendra Gupta, as somebody who's served in the area and knows the area very well, in a situation where tensions are as fraught as they are, what is the path to a ceasefire? Are we anywhere closer to looking at a strategy? Is the release of hostages, for example, the path or the step needed for talks on a meaningful ceasefire?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm very distressed to see constant escalation and difficulty for everybody. I don't think this is the time for taking sides or apportioning blame.
Yeah.
One has to look at the bigger picture. The whole world, including people in India, was shocked at the terrorist incident on the October 7. But we are equally shocked and horrified to see the conditions in Gaza. The visuals coming out are absolutely distressing. The whole residential neighborhoods have been flattened. So there are people dying. More than 10,000 people in Gaza have died, Palestinians. That includes women and children. So I think you can't measure, you can't prioritize or create a hierarchy about who's suffering. I think people on both sides have suffered, and it is time. Now, what I'm very surprised at is that a lot of leaders of Islamic world are talking about ceasefire, which is of course the right thing to do. But nobody, in fact, I have not come across any statements urging the release of hostages. Without the release of hostages, this war is not going to end. And I think it's very important, it's only fair that the hostages must be first released, and then, so the countries which have influence on Hamas will have to bear that influence, bring that influence over. And if they really want peace, if they really want suffering of the people in Palestine to end, then the way to go about is, first is the release of hostages, then there has to be cessation of bombing and cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, and afterwards a very sincere effort by all concerned, including countries which can play a very active role, like America, to bring about a final settlement, resolution of the Palestinian problem. Because I believe unless the resolution happens, unless the Palestinians are given a dignified solution. Look, the agenda has been hijacked by the terrorist elements.
Yes.
Hamas is at best a terrorist organization. They don't represent Palestinians, but that is how the civilians suffer. We have to have some degree of compassion for thousands of civilians, Palestinians who are dying. I don't know, we talk about the women and children having been butchered when the terrorist attack took place, and hundreds of hostages were taken. Yes, it is right, and the whole world is expressed its anguish. But then, equally, distressing is how when you see people in Palestine also dying. So I think the time is over. We can't take one-sided position.
Absolutely. I think the only position is one which needs to be based on humanity. And I think that's
Absolutely.
that's the only thing that we can all think about. The question is, how do we really get there? I'd like to thank you all very much, as always, for joining us. We'll keep tracking the situation in West Asia, which seems to be getting more tense by the day.